Marcus Thompson stepped out of his expensive black taxi at the gates of Buckingham Palace with the kind of swagger that only comes from having too much money and too little respect for others. He was a 42-year-old businessman from New York who owned 3 successful companies and believed that his wealth could open any door in the world. Today he wore a custom-made Italian suit that cost more than most people made in a month and carried himself like he owned every street he walked on. The morning sun glinted off his gold watch as he pulled out his latest smartphone to take pictures. Marcus had come to London for what he called a working vacation, but his real goal was much more foolish. 3 weeks ago, at an expensive restaurant in Manhattan, he had made a bet with his wealthy friends. They were all bragging about their travels and the exclusive places they had visited when someone mentioned the famous royal guards at Buckingham Palace. "Those guys in the funny red uniforms and tall black hats," Marcus had said with a laugh. "I bet I could make one of them break character in less than 5 minutes." His friends had laughed and shaken their heads, but Marcus was serious. He pulled out his wallet and slapped down $5,000 on the table. "Anyone want to bet against me?" he had asked with that cocky smile that had annoyed people his whole life. Now, standing in front of the palace, Marcus felt that same confidence flowing through him. He looked at the tourists around him taking selfies and buying postcards and felt superior to all of them. These people were satisfied with just looking at the guards from a distance, but Marcus was going to do something none of them had the courage to try. He was going to prove that these so-called elite soldiers were nothing more than actors in costumes. Marcus walked closer to the palace gates and saw his first target. A royal guard stood perfectly still at his post wearing the traditional red tunic and tall black bearskin hat. The soldier held his rifle at his side and stared straight ahead without moving a muscle. To Marcus, this guard looked like nothing more than a life-size toy soldier placed there to entertain tourists and sell postcards. What Marcus did not know was that he was looking at Guardsman Peter Davies, a 26-year-old soldier who had served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. Peter had joined the British Army at 18 and had worked his way up through years of intense training and real combat experience. Being selected for the Royal Guard was one of the highest honors a British soldier could receive, and Peter took his duty very seriously. The guard training had taught Peter to remain completely still and focused no matter what happened around him. He had learned to ignore screaming children, loud tourists, and even people who tried to distract him on purpose. But Peter was also trained in combat techniques, weapons handling, and crowd control. He was not just a tourist attraction, he was a highly skilled soldier with the authority to arrest anyone who threatened security. Marcus walked in a circle around the guard, taking pictures from every angle. He noticed how the soldier never moved his eyes or changed his expression. "Perfect," Marcus thought to himself. "This is going to be easier than I thought." He imagined the look on his friends' faces when he showed them the video of him making a royal guard lose his composure. Other tourists nearby began to notice Marcus as he got closer and closer to the guard. Some of them took pictures of Marcus, thinking he was part of some kind of show. A few visitors whispered to each other, wondering if the American tourist knew what he was doing. But Marcus was too focused on his target to care about what anyone else thought. He pulled out his phone and started recording himself. "Today I am going to do something that no other tourist has ever done," he announced to his camera. "I am going to make one of these statue soldiers break character. Watch this, everyone." Marcus had no idea that his foolish confidence was about to lead him into the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus started his plan with what he thought were harmless pranks. He positioned himself right next to Guardsman Peter Davies and began making funny faces at the camera, while the soldier stood perfectly still behind him. The morning crowd of tourists was getting larger, and many of them stopped to watch what the well-dressed American was doing. "Look at this, everyone," Marcus said loudly while recording himself. "This guy is supposed to be some kind of elite soldier, but he cannot even react to me standing right here." He waved his hand dramatically just inches from the guard's face, but Peter did not move a single muscle. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, and his breathing stayed perfectly steady. Marcus felt a rush of excitement as he saw other tourists starting to take pictures of his performance. This was exactly what he wanted. He imagined posting these photos on social media and showing his friends back home how he had conquered the famous British Royal Guards. In his mind, he was already planning the caption for his Instagram post about embarrassing the palace security. He moved even closer to the guard and started making loud comments about the red uniform. "Nice dress," he said with a smirk. "Do you get to pick the color, or does mommy dress you every morning?" Several tourists gasped at his rudeness, but Marcus just laughed. He was enjoying being the center of attention and thought the shocked reactions meant people were impressed by his boldness. What Marcus did not understand was that Guardsman Davies was actually very aware of everything happening around him. Peter could see Marcus in his peripheral vision and could hear every word he was saying. The soldier had dealt with difficult tourists before, but something about this man's behavior was different. Most people who got too close were just excited or curious, but Marcus seemed deliberately disrespectful and increasingly aggressive. Peter's military training had taught him to assess threats, and this American tourist was starting to show warning signs. The man was getting bolder with each passing minute and was clearly trying to provoke some kind of reaction. Peter made a mental note to stay extra alert and prepared himself for the possibility that this situation might escalate beyond normal tourist behavior. Marcus pulled out his expensive wallet and waved it in front of the guard's face. "Hey, statue man," he called out. "I bet I make more money in one day than you make in a whole year. Maybe you should quit this dress-up job and get some real work." He laughed at his own joke and looked around for approval from the crowd, but most people were starting to look uncomfortable. A police officer who was patrolling the area noticed the commotion and walked over to where Marcus was standing. The officer was Constable Sarah Williams, a 10-year veteran who had seen plenty of tourists get carried away at the palace. She approached Marcus with a professional but friendly smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "I need to ask you to please step back and maintain a respectful distance from the guard." Marcus looked at her with surprise and annoyance. He had not expected anyone to actually tell him to stop. "Relax, officer," Marcus said with fake charm. "I am just having some fun. This is a free country, right? I am not hurting anyone." He gestured toward Peter, who continued to stand perfectly still. "See, he does not mind. He probably enjoys the entertainment." Constable Williams kept her voice calm but firm. "Sir, these guards are on active duty, and there are guidelines about how close visitors can get. I need you to step back behind the designated area and enjoy your visit from there." She pointed to a spot about 6 feet away where other tourists were standing and taking pictures. Marcus felt his face getting red with embarrassment. Having a police officer correct him in front of all these people was not part of his plan. He looked around and saw that everyone was watching him now, but not in the way he had wanted. Instead of looking impressed, they seemed to be waiting to see if he would cause more trouble. "Fine," he said loudly, "but this whole thing is ridiculous. These guys are just tourist attractions pretending to be real soldiers." He stepped back to where the officer had indicated, but his eyes never left the guard. Marcus was already planning his next move, and this time he was going to make sure nobody could stop him from proving his point. Marcus waited exactly 15 minutes for Constable Williams to move away from his area before he put his new plan into action. He had spotted what he thought was a much better target on the other side of the palace courtyard. There stood another royal guard at a different post, and this one seemed to be in a more isolated spot with fewer people around. What Marcus did not know was that he was now looking at Sergeant James Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the British Army who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. James was not just any guard. He was a senior non-commissioned officer who had been specially selected for one of the most important security positions at the palace. The area where James stood was actually more restricted than where Marcus had been before. Marcus walked casually towards Sergeant Mitchell, trying to look like just another tourist exploring the palace grounds. As he got closer, he noticed several signs posted around the area. The signs clearly stated that this was a restricted zone and that unauthorized personnel were not allowed beyond certain points. Red rope barriers marked the boundaries, and security cameras were visible on nearby posts. But Marcus was too focused on his goal to pay attention to these warnings. In his mind, the signs were just there to keep regular tourists away, and surely did not apply to someone like him who had money and confidence. He looked around quickly to make sure no police officers were nearby, then stepped over the rope barrier like it was nothing more than a suggestion. The moment Marcus crossed the barrier, Sergeant Mitchell noticed the movement in his peripheral vision. Unlike the younger guard Peter, who was still learning to deal with difficult tourists, James had years of experience reading people and situations. He immediately recognized that this was not an accidental mistake by a confused visitor, but a deliberate act by someone who thought rules did not apply to them. Marcus walked right up to Sergeant Mitchell with the same cocky smile he had worn all morning. He pulled out his phone again and started recording himself standing next to the guard. "Now this is more like it," he said to his camera. "I found one of these toy soldiers who is all by himself with no backup." James remained perfectly still, but his trained eyes quickly assessed the situation. The American tourist had deliberately crossed security barriers, was now in a restricted area, and was behaving in an increasingly aggressive manner. James had dealt with real threats in combat zones, and something about this man's body language and escalating behavior set off alarm bells in his military-trained mind. Marcus moved even closer to the guard until he was standing just inches away from him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. "Hey there, statue boy," he said loudly. "How much do they pay you to stand here and look stupid all day? I bet it's not much. Maybe you want to make some real money instead." When James still did not respond, Marcus felt his anger rising. He had expected to get some kind of reaction by now, and the complete lack of response was making him feel foolish. He looked at the guard's rifle and suddenly got an idea that would change everything. The weapon looked old-fashioned and decorative to Marcus. In his ignorance, he assumed it was probably not even real, or if it was real, it was probably not loaded. He had seen movies where palace guards carried fake weapons just for show, and he convinced himself that this must be the same situation. "I bet that gun is not even real," Marcus said as he moved his hand toward the rifle. James saw the movement and felt every muscle in his body tense up. In all his years of service, no one had ever been foolish enough to try to touch his weapon. Marcus reached out his hand toward Sergeant Mitchell's rifle, believing he was about to expose the whole Royal Guard system as a fake tourist attraction. He had no idea that he was about to cross a line that would bring the full force of British military training down on him. The moment Marcus reached toward the rifle, Sergeant James Mitchell broke his silence with a voice that could be heard across the entire courtyard. "Step back immediately, sir," he commanded in a tone that carried all the authority of his 15 years of military service. "You are in a restricted area, and you need to move away from me right now." Marcus jerked his hand back in surprise. He had not expected the guard to speak at all, let alone with such power and command. For just a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt about what he was doing. But then he looked around and saw that a crowd of tourists had gathered to watch what was happening. Some of them were taking pictures and recording videos with their phones. The attention from the crowd made Marcus feel like he was performing on a stage. Instead of backing down like any sensible person would have done, he decided to double down on his foolish behavior. He pulled out his own phone and held it up to record himself arguing with the guard. "Listen here, soldier boy," Marcus said loudly, making sure his voice would be picked up clearly on the video. "I paid good money to come to this country and visit this palace. That means I have every right to go wherever I want and see whatever I want to see. You work for the government, and I am a taxpayer, so technically you work for people like me." Sergeant Mitchell repeated his warning in the same firm tone. "Sir, I am ordering you to step back behind the barrier immediately. You are in violation of security protocols, and if you do not comply, I will be forced to take further action." But Marcus was now fully committed to his performance for the cameras. He had started this confrontation to impress his friends back home, and now, with dozens of people watching and recording, he felt like he could not back down without looking weak. His pride and arrogance took over completely. "Oh, really?" Marcus said with a mocking laugh. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, tough guy? You are nothing but a tourist attraction in a fancy costume. I bet that rifle is not even loaded. I bet you do not even know how to use it. You are probably just some actor they hired to stand here and look pretty for the cameras." The crowd around them was getting larger as more tourists noticed the confrontation. Some people looked worried and uncomfortable, while others seemed excited to be witnessing drama. Several visitors whispered to each other, wondering if they should call for help or if this was some kind of scheduled demonstration. James had dealt with hostile situations before, but always in military combat zones, where the rules of engagement were clear. Dealing with an aggressive civilian tourist in front of cameras and crowds required a different kind of control. He had to balance his duty to maintain security with the need to avoid creating an international incident. Marcus moved closer to the guard again, this time narrating his actions for his phone camera. "You see everyone," he said, addressing his recording. "These so-called elite guards are all show and no substance. Watch what happens when someone actually challenges them instead of just taking pictures from far away." He reached toward the rifle again, this time more boldly. "I am going to prove that this weapon is just a prop, and this whole thing is nothing but theater for tourists." As his hand got closer to the rifle, James felt his military training kick into high gear. No one in 15 years of service had ever tried to grab his weapon, and every instinct told him this was a serious threat. "Sir," James said one final time, his voice now carrying a warning that made several tourists step backward. "If you touch my weapon, I will consider you a security threat and respond accordingly. This is your last warning." But Marcus was too caught up in his performance to listen to reason. He looked directly into his phone camera and said with a cocky grin, "Watch this, everyone. I am about to show you what happens when someone calls their bluff." He reached out and actually grabbed the barrel of Sergeant Mitchell's rifle, thinking he was about to pull away a fake prop and expose the Royal Guards as frauds. Instead, he was about to discover just how real and serious these soldiers actually were. The moment Marcus made contact with the weapon, James Mitchell switched from ceremonial guard mode to combat soldier mode. Everything that happened next would be caught on camera by dozens of phones and would change Marcus' life forever. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it would be replayed in slow motion on news channels around the world for weeks to come. The moment Marcus grabbed the rifle, Sergeant James Mitchell transformed from a still ceremonial guard into a highly trained combat soldier executing a perfect defensive maneuver. In one lightning-fast movement, James secured his weapon with his right hand, while his left arm swept around to control Marcus' wrist. Using a technique he had learned in military training, James applied just enough pressure to a nerve point that made Marcus immediately release his grip on the rifle. Before Marcus could react or even understand what was happening, James had spun him around and guided him face down onto the ground. The entire crowd gasped in shock and amazement. Cameras clicked and phone videos captured every second as Marcus went from standing confidently to lying flat on the pavement with his expensive suit getting dirty and his face pressed against the cold stone courtyard. His phone skittered across the ground, and the screen cracked when it hit the edge of a flower bed. James kept one knee positioned to control Marcus while he used his radio to call for backup. The professional calm in his voice was remarkable considering what had just happened. "This is Sergeant Mitchell at Post 7, he reported. "I have detained a civilian who attempted to grab my weapon, requesting immediate assistance and police response." Marcus tried to lift his head and speak, but James' voice cut through his confusion. "Stay down and remain still, sir. Do not attempt to move until police arrive. You are being detained for attempting to interfere with a royal guard and for security violations." The crowd that had been laughing and taking pictures just moments before now stood in stunned silence. Many tourists looked shocked and scared as they realized they had just witnessed something very serious. Parents pulled their children closer and several people started backing away from the scene. Within 60 seconds, other royal guards appeared as if from nowhere. These were not the ceremonial guards that tourists usually saw, but members of the palace security team who wore different uniforms and carried modern equipment. They moved with military precision surrounding the area, and establishing a security perimeter. Marcus finally understood that this was not going according to his plan at all. The men standing around him were not tourist attractions or actors in costumes. They were real soldiers with real authority, and he had just committed what they considered a serious crime. His cocky confidence evaporated completely as the reality of his situation hit him. One of the security team members knelt down next to Marcus and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Sir, I am going to explain what is happening. You attempted to grab a service weapon from a royal guard, which is considered a serious security breach. You will be arrested and charged accordingly. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Marcus tried to explain that it was all just a misunderstanding and that he was only trying to prove a point to his friends. But his words came out in a panicked jumble that made no sense. The expensive suit that had made him feel so confident was now wrinkled and dirty. His perfectly styled hair was messed up, and his face was red with embarrassment and fear. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer by the second. Constable Williams, who had warned Marcus earlier, was among the first officers to arrive at the scene. When she saw Marcus on the ground, she shook her head with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. "I warned him," she told Sergeant Mitchell. "I told him to maintain distance and show respect, but he clearly did not listen." James nodded and gave her a brief report of what had happened while keeping Marcus securely detained. More police officers arrived and began taking statements from witnesses in the crowd. Dozens of tourists had recorded the entire incident on their phones, and the officers collected contact information so they could get copies of the videos as evidence. Marcus lay on the ground listening to the activity around him and slowly realizing that his foolish bet with his friends had turned into the biggest mistake of his life. The $5,000 he had wagered now seemed like nothing compared to the legal troubles he was facing. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus finally understood the difference between tourist attraction and military security. The Royal Guards were not just for show, and their weapons were definitely not props. He had learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible in front of hundreds of witnesses and dozens of cameras. The police station was nothing like the movies Marcus had seen, where wealthy people could make phone calls and walk out within an hour. Instead, he found himself in a small gray room being processed like any other criminal. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained, his gold watch had been taken as part of the booking procedure, and his confident smile had been replaced by a look of growing panic. Detective Inspector Helen Clark sat across from Marcus at a metal table with a thick file folder in front of her. She was a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police who had handled hundreds of cases involving tourists who got into trouble in London. But she had never seen someone make such a serious mistake at Buckingham Palace. "Mr. Thompson," she began in a professional tone, "I need to explain to you exactly what you have been charged with and how serious these charges are." Marcus nodded quickly, hoping that his cooperation might help his situation. He still believed that his money and status would eventually get him out of this mess. "You have been charged with 3 separate offenses," Detective Clark continued. "First, attempting to interfere with a royal guard in the performance of his duty. Second, entering a restricted security area without authorization. Third, attempting to handle a service weapon without proper clearance. Each of these charges carries significant penalties under British law." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he listened to the list. "But it was just a misunderstanding," he said weakly. "I did not know those were real charges. I thought it was all just for show for the tourists. I was not trying to hurt anyone or cause any real problems." Detective Clark opened the file and showed Marcus several photos that had been taken at the scene. The pictures clearly showed him crossing the security barriers, reaching for the guard's weapon, and being taken down by Sergeant Mitchell. She also had printed copies of social media posts where Marcus had bragged about his plan to humiliate the Royal Guards. "Mr. Thompson, the evidence shows that your actions were deliberate and planned," she said, pointing to his own social media posts. "You posted on your Instagram account 3 days ago that you were going to make a Royal Guard break character. You told several people at your hotel that you were going to prove the guards were fake. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a planned attempt to interfere with palace security." Marcus realized that his own social media posts and big mouth had created a trail of evidence that proved his intentions. He had been so eager to brag about his plan that he had documented everything the police needed to prove their case against him. The detective explained that royal guards were not just ceremonial figures, but active duty soldiers with the same authority as any other military personnel. Interfering with them was equivalent to interfering with any soldier on duty, and attempting to grab their weapons was considered a serious security threat. "But I am an American citizen," Marcus protested. "Does that not give me some kind of protection or different treatment?" Detective Clark shook her head firmly. "British law applies to everyone who commits crimes on British soil regardless of their nationality. Your citizenship does not excuse you from following our laws." She pulled out another document and placed it in front of Marcus. "This is a list of the potential penalties you are facing," she said. "The charges could result in fines up to £50,000, up to 2 years in prison, and a permanent criminal record that will affect your ability to travel internationally in the future." Marcus felt the color drain from his face as he read the list of penalties. £50,000 was more than he had expected to spend on his entire vacation. 2 years in prison would destroy his business and his reputation. A criminal record would affect every aspect of his life, from travel to business deals to personal relationships. "I need to call my lawyer," Marcus said desperately. "Surely there is something we can work out. I have money, I can pay whatever fines are necessary. I just want to go home and forget this ever happened." Detective Clark explained that while he was entitled to legal representation, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and the charges were very serious. Multiple witnesses had seen his actions, dozens of videos had been taken, and his own social media posts proved his intentions. "Your lawyer will be able to advise you on how to plead," she said, "but I should warn you that cases like this are taken very seriously by British courts. The security of the royal family and their residences is not something we treat lightly." As Marcus sat in the police station waiting for his lawyer to arrive, he began to understand just how badly he had misjudged the situation. What had started as a foolish bet with his friends had turned into a legal nightmare that could follow him for the rest of his life. He thought about his business partners back home and how they would react when they found out about his arrest. He thought about his family and friends who would see the videos on social media. Most of all, he thought about how his arrogance and disrespect had led him to this moment, sitting in a British police station, facing serious criminal charges. Marcus' lawyer arrived at the police station 6 hours after his arrest. Richard Pemberton was an expensive London solicitor who specialized in helping wealthy foreigners who got into legal trouble while visiting Britain. He had handled cases involving drunk driving incidents, business disputes, and even some minor assault charges, but he had never dealt with someone who had tried to grab a weapon from a royal guard. "Mr. Thompson," Pemberton said as he sat down across from Marcus in the consultation room, "I have reviewed the charges against you, and I must tell you that your situation is quite serious. The evidence against you is substantial, and the charges you are facing are not minor offenses that can be easily dismissed." Marcus leaned forward desperately. "But surely there is something you can do," he said. "I have money, I can pay whatever it takes to make this go away. This is all just a big misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion." Pemberton shook his head slowly. "I am afraid it does not work that way in the British legal system. These charges involve national security and the protection of the royal family. The courts take such matters very seriously, regardless of the defendant's financial status or nationality." The lawyer explained that Marcus had been caught on camera by dozens of witnesses committing acts that were clearly defined as crimes under British law. The videos showed him deliberately crossing security barriers, ignoring police warnings, and attempting to grab a soldier's weapon. His own social media posts proved that his actions were premeditated rather than accidental. "What are my options?" Marcus asked, his voice getting smaller and more worried with each passing minute. Pemberton pulled out a legal pad and began writing notes as he spoke. "Your best option is to plead guilty to the charges and hope for leniency from the court. If you plead not guilty and go to trial, the evidence against you is so strong that you will almost certainly be convicted, and the penalties could be much more severe." Marcus felt sick to his stomach as he listened to his lawyer's advice. Everything about this situation was the opposite of what he had expected when he made that foolish bet with his friends. He had thought he would spend a few minutes embarrassing a guard, take some funny videos, and then go home with a great story to tell. Instead, he was facing the possibility of prison time and a criminal record that would follow him forever. Pemberton continued explaining the legal process. If you plead guilty, the case will likely be resolved much more quickly. The court will still impose penalties, but judges sometimes show more mercy to defendants who accept responsibility for their actions. However, you need to understand that even with a guilty plea, you will face significant fines and a criminal record. The lawyer also explained the immigration consequences of Marcus' situation. A criminal conviction could affect his ability to return to the United Kingdom in the future. It could also create problems when he tried to travel to other countries, since many nations shared criminal background information with each other. Marcus thought about his 3 companies back in New York and how a criminal record might affect his business dealings. Many of his contracts included clauses about criminal behavior, and some of his business partners might decide to end their relationships with him if he became a convicted criminal. That evening, Marcus was released on bail, but he had to surrender his passport and agree to stay in London until his case was resolved. He checked into an expensive hotel near his lawyer's office and spent the night trying to figure out how to explain the situation to his family and business partners. The next morning, Marcus woke up to discover that his arrest had become international news. Videos of his confrontation with Sergeant Mitchell were being shown on news channels around the world. The story was being covered as an example of entitled tourist behavior and disrespect for British traditions and security. His phone was buzzing constantly with calls and text messages from friends, family members, and business associates who had seen the news coverage. Some people were concerned about his well-being, but others were angry and disappointed in his behavior. Several of his business partners left voicemails saying they needed to discuss how his legal troubles might affect their ongoing projects. Marcus realized that even if he managed to avoid prison time, the damage to his reputation was already done. The videos would be on the internet forever, and anyone who searched his name would find stories about his arrest at Buckingham Palace. His foolish attempt to impress his friends had backfired in the worst possible way. He called his assistant back in New York and asked her to cancel all his meetings for the next 2 weeks. He also asked her to prepare a statement for the media, although he had no idea what he could possibly say that would make the situation any better. As Marcus sat in his hotel room watching news coverage of his own arrest, he began to understand that the consequences of his actions were just beginning. The legal penalties were only part of the price he would have to pay for his arrogance and disrespect. By the 3rd day after his arrest, Marcus discovered that his humiliation had spread far beyond what he could have imagined. The videos of his confrontation with Sergeant Mitchell had been viewed millions of times across social media platforms. News outlets from around the world were using his story as an example of ugly American tourist behavior and disrespect for foreign cultures. Marcus sat in his London hotel room scrolling through social media comments and news articles about himself. The things people were saying about him were brutal and personal. They called him arrogant, entitled, and stupid. Many comments focused on how his expensive clothes and confident attitude had made his downfall even more satisfying to watch. One viral video compilation showed Marcus' transformation from cocky tourist to arrested criminal in just under 2 minutes. The video had been viewed over 10 million times and shared by celebrities, politicians, and news personalities. The caption read, "American millionaire learns hard lesson about British royal guards," and the comments section was filled with people making jokes about his humiliation. Marcus' phone rang constantly with calls from reporters wanting interviews. Several talk show hosts had reached out asking him to appear on their programs to discuss what happened. A few publishers had even contacted him about writing a book about his experience, but his lawyer had advised him to avoid all media contact until his legal case was resolved. The coverage was not limited to entertainment and social media. Serious news programs were using his story to discuss issues of tourist behavior, cultural respect, and security at royal residences. Legal experts appeared on television to explain the charges he was facing and why his actions were considered so serious under British law. Back in New York, Marcus' business was suffering from the negative publicity. 3 of his major clients had called emergency meetings to discuss whether they wanted to continue working with someone who had become internationally famous for all the wrong reasons. His company's stock price had dropped significantly as investors worried about the impact of his legal troubles on business operations. Marcus' wife called him crying after she saw the videos online. Their teenage children were being teased at school by classmates who had seen the news coverage. His elderly mother was upset and confused about why her successful son had done something so foolish and embarrassing. The worst part for Marcus was reading the comments from other Americans who were ashamed that he had reinforced negative stereotypes about American tourists. Many people wrote that his behavior made all Americans look bad when they traveled abroad. Some comments mentioned that they would now be embarrassed to visit London because of the negative attention his actions had brought to American visitors. Several British newspapers ran editorials about the incident. One titled "The Ugly American Tourist Problem" discussed how Marcus' behavior represented a broader issue of disrespect that some visitors showed toward British traditions and security. Another editorial praised Sergeant Mitchell for his professional handling of the situation and called him a model of military discipline. Marcus discovered that his arrest had even been discussed in the British Parliament. A member of Parliament had mentioned the incident during a debate about tourist behavior and security at royal residences. The MP had used Marcus' case as an example of why stricter penalties were needed for people who interfered with palace security. International travel websites began featuring Marcus' story as a cautionary tale for tourists visiting London. Several sites created lists of do's and don'ts for visitors to royal residences, with his case used as the primary example of what not to do. Tourism guides started including warnings about respecting royal guards and the serious legal consequences of interfering with them. The humiliation extended to his professional network as well. Marcus had been scheduled to speak at several business conferences over the next few months, but the organizers began calling to cancel his appearances. They explained that his recent legal troubles and negative publicity made him unsuitable as a speaker for their events. Online reviews of his companies began appearing, with people writing negative comments about doing business with someone who had shown such poor judgment and disrespect. Some reviews specifically mentioned the videos of his arrest and questioned whether someone with such bad decision-making skills could be trusted with important business matters. Marcus realized that his attempt to create entertaining content for social media had backfired completely. Instead of being known as the successful businessman who outsmarted the royal guards, he was now internationally famous as the arrogant American who got humiliated by British military discipline. The $5,000 bet that had started this whole mess now seemed insignificant compared to the millions of dollars in business he was likely to lose. The few minutes of attention he had wanted from his friends had turned into worldwide attention that was destroying his reputation and his livelihood. As Marcus prepared for his court appearance, he understood that the legal consequences would be just the beginning of his punishment. The court of public opinion had already found him guilty, and the sentence was a lifetime of being remembered as a cautionary tale about American arrogance abroad. 6 months after his arrest, Marcus Thompson stood in a London courtroom listening to the judge deliver his sentence. He had decided to plead guilty to all charges on the advice of his lawyer, hoping that accepting responsibility would result in more lenient treatment. The judge was not impressed by his apology or his claims that he had learned his lesson. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said sternly, "your actions at Buckingham Palace showed a complete disregard for British law and security protocols. You deliberately ignored warnings from police officers, crossed security barriers, and attempted to interfere with a royal guard who was performing his duty. Your behavior was reckless, entitled, and potentially dangerous." Marcus was sentenced to pay fines totaling £35,000, serve 200 hours of community service, and accept a criminal record that would remain on file for 7 years. He was also banned from visiting any royal residences or properties for the next 10 years. The judge made it clear that he was being lenient only because Marcus had pleaded guilty and shown remorse for his actions. After the sentencing, Marcus met with his lawyer to discuss the immigration consequences of his conviction. His criminal record would make it difficult for him to obtain visas for many countries, and he would have to disclose his conviction on travel and business applications for years to come. The freedom to travel internationally that he had always taken for granted was now severely restricted. When Marcus finally returned to New York 3 weeks later, he found that his business empire had suffered serious damage during his absence. 2 major clients had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about his judgment and the negative publicity surrounding his arrest. His company's stock had lost 40% of its value, and several key employees had left to work for competitors. The insurance company that covered his business operations conducted a review of his case and decided to significantly increase his premiums. They classified him as a high-risk client due to his criminal conviction and poor decision-making. The additional insurance costs would add hundreds of thousands of dollars to his annual business expenses. Marcus' personal life was also permanently changed by his experience. His wife had filed for divorce while he was in London dealing with his legal troubles. She told reporters that she could no longer be married to someone who had embarrassed their family so publicly and shown such poor judgment. The divorce proceedings were complicated by the negative publicity which affected the value of their shared assets. His teenage children struggled with the ongoing attention from their classmates and teachers. The videos of their father's arrest were still circulating online and being shared in their social media feeds. Both children asked to transfer to different schools, where they hoped to escape the constant reminders of their father's public humiliation. Marcus' business relationships never fully recovered from the incident. Even clients who chose to continue working with him negotiated much more favorable terms for themselves, knowing that his reduced reputation gave them more leverage in negotiations. Several potential business deals fell through when partners decided they did not want to be associated with someone who had such a notorious public image. The story of Marcus' encounter with the Royal Guard became a permanent part of internet culture. The videos were regularly shared on social media as examples of instant karma and entitled behavior getting its comeuppance. Every few months, the story would resurface and go viral again, bringing fresh waves of negative attention to Marcus and his family. Tourism guides and travel websites continued to use Marcus' case as a cautionary tale for visitors to London. His name became synonymous with disrespectful tourist behavior, and his story was told as a warning about the serious consequences of interfering with British security. Tour guides at Buckingham Palace would sometimes point to the exact spot where Marcus was arrested while explaining proper behavior to their groups. Sergeant James Mitchell was commended by his superiors for his professional handling of the situation. The incident actually enhanced his reputation within the military, and he was promoted to a higher position within the Royal Guard. The way he had controlled the situation without using excessive force was used as a training example for other soldiers. Marcus attempted to rebuild his reputation by making charitable donations and volunteering for community service projects, but the internet never forgets. Anytime someone searched his name, the first results were still news articles and videos about his arrest at Buckingham Palace. His foolish bet with his friends had created a digital permanent record that would follow him for the rest of his life. 5 years after the incident, Marcus had managed to stabilize his business and personal life to some degree, but he never regained the status and respect he had enjoyed before his arrest. He became a cautionary tale told in business schools about how a single moment of poor judgment can destroy a lifetime of success. The Royal Guards continued their duties at Buckingham Palace, maintaining the same professional standards that had made them legendary. Marcus' story became part of their informal history, a reminder that their role was not just ceremonial but involved real security responsibilities that demanded respect from all visitors regardless of their wealth or nationality.